Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
How are you today?
Good.
It is so nice to see all of you. So please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Elizabeth Van Loo, and I am here today as a representative of the 19th century, but more specifically of that critical time in our nation's history, the Civil War, or the war between the states, or the War of Secession to my mind. From the time I knew right from wrong, it was my sad privilege to differ in many opinions from those of my locality, slavery and the preservation of the Union being the most important of these. Now, before the lecture begins, I should introduce myself a little bit, tell you a little bit about myself, but I have some things to show you as well. Here we go. So we're trying something new tonight, as you can see. So let's see if I can figure out this contraption here. Let's see. That's not right. Well, we'll just leave it there, and we'll hope that the next one is good. So, no, wait a minute. See, this is why I don't do this. All right, well, let's see. Is anybody good at these things? All right, well, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. So, see, I have my backups here just in case. Which I'm gonna.
Who do you need?
These.
I can't promise anything.
If you can find them. Okay. So I was born in Richmond, Virginia. I was the oldest child of 3, born to John Van Loo, who was a successful Richmond hardware merchant, originally from the North, and Alisa. You have it? Alisa Baker. Alisa Baker, my mother, she was the daughter of Hillary Baker, who was a Philadelphia mayor, and...
They all say Van Loo, that's why.
Oh my goodness, okay.
They're numbered and it says Van Loo, so I don't know who's who.
Well, maybe the second one, I don't know. My grandfather was an ardent patriot during the Revolutionary War. Oh, no, that's not the right one. Oh my goodness. No, that's not the right one either. Oh my goodness. That's you're going to see everybody before I even talk about them. Well, in my family, we lived well in a mansion. Here, I'm going to show it because, see, this is why we don't want to have all this stuff. We lived in a house on top of Church Hill, so we'll pass these around and I'll hold one up. How about that? I'll just do that. How's that? You see that? All right. So we had many visitors to Church Hill over the years. Chief Justice John Marshall, the author Edgar Allan Poe, and the singer Jenny Lind, just to name a few. So we also owned a farm opposite City Point, if you can see it on the map there. And that was worked by a dozen or so slaves that we owned, much to my chagrin. But that farm would later be very important to my spy ring. And this leads me to how I got involved in espionage. I despised the label spy, and I wrote in my papers, which I will quote for you, I do not know how they can call me a spy serving my own country within its recognized borders. And I wished that I simply could be remembered as a patriot like my grandfather. So as I mentioned, my grandfather was Hilary Baker, and he was mayor of Philadelphia for 3 terms. He was one of the first members of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. And my mother was raised in Philadelphia. Now, my parents were very much in love. They had quite an egalitarian marriage for the time, based on intellectual pursuits and conversation. My mother did play the part of the perfect Southern belle, even though she, like me, disagreed with the institution of slavery because she had been brought up in Philadelphia. And she made sure that I received an excellent education by sending me to Philadelphia as well. So, unfortunately for us, my father died quite early in 1843, following a very long illness. And I was very sad because I adored my father. We got along very well, although he and I did not see eye to eye on the issue of slavery. And in his will, he wrote a codicil that my mother would inherit all of our slaves, but she would not be able to sell any of them, because he knew exactly what my mother would do. He also knew that our family could not be and would not be accepted by the Virginia and especially the Richmond elite without having 3 things. One was family connections, which we did have through my grandfather. Wealth, which thanks to my father's hard work, we had achieved. But the third thing was to own slaves. Now, my mother and I disagreed with this, but also there was another little problem. In 1808, Virginia had passed a law that any slave who was freed had to leave the Commonwealth within the year and could never return. So just imagine if you had someone in your family and they had married someone or had children with someone outside your household, what would they do? So this became quite a conundrum for us. And we did not want our people to be separated from the ones that we loved, or the ones that they loved. And of course, we cared for our people as well. But over the years, my mother and I did try to free, or at least make as free as possible, those within our circle. And I cannot begin to describe to you how helpful some of my people were to me during the Civil War. A very important person in my life was Mary Richards. You may have heard of her being called Mary Bowser. She was a former slave whom we had baptized in our own church, and then we sent her to Liberia to do some missionary work. But she wanted to come home, and it was good that she wanted to come home because she was so helpful to me in my spiring. But I must debunk some myths here. There are those who say that Mary was my child. I wasn't even married. I never got married, so no. And also, people say that I infiltrated her into the Confederate White House and that she had a photographic memory. I have to say, we did work within the Confederate White House. Have you heard of Jefferson Davis? So his wife, Verena Davis, she said, oh no, we didn't have anyone, we didn't have any kind of educated slave in our, well, of course she's going to say that, but we did infiltrate her. In any case, she did not have a photographic memory, but she had an excellent memory. So as she was working in the Confederate White House, she would notice papers, she would notice maps, she would listen to conversations, and then we would meet at that farm I told you about at City Point, and it wasn't to exchange recipes. She was giving me some important information. Also, during the war, it is said that I was called Crazy Bet because I walked around acting like I was crazy so that people would divulge their secrets to me. I think that my detractors and those in the South would like to believe that I was crazy because that made for a good narrative, a good story, but I wasn't crazy. I was a Southern Unionist woman, not crazy. But I was not the only Southern woman who was a spy. Now, can we go back to the Harriet Tubman? Would you be able to find that again?
That was the top one.
I think it was the top. It was the top one. There we go. There we go. That's perfect. All right. So Harriet Tubman from the South was an abolitionist and a Union spy herself who was born into slavery and helped to rescue more than 300 slaves through a network of activists and safe houses that you know as the Underground Railroad. Very good. She also worked with the Union Army to help the slaves travel to the North once they had been freed and once they made it behind Union lines. Now, she also gathered intelligence for the Army, and she was dressed as a field hand. I don't think I have a picture of her dressed as a field hand, but she led scouting and spying missions to help identify and map the Confederate mines, the supply areas and troops, and she delivered that information to the Union Colonel James Montgomery. And in June 1863, she and Colonel Montgomery led the raid at Combahee Ferry, using her intelligence information to navigate around the Confederate mines that had been placed in the river. And they successfully rescued more than 700 slaves from the plantations along the river and got them to the North. Very brave. Now, was it bravery or folly that kept Mother and I in Virginia? People have asked me whether Mother and I, why we stayed in Virginia even after the state had decided to secede from the Union. And it's a very complicated issue. We felt a deep responsibility to my father's efforts to establish us in Richmond. And we felt a responsibility to our black dependents. I would have lost the ability to improve the lives of those that I cared about. And as for my mother, she felt that our people were safer and better off with us than with any other Southern master. My mother and I had hoped for a peaceful and gradual emancipation. Sadly, that was not to be the case. And in reality, we decided that we were going to help the Union when we realized what was happening. It was expected that we would support the Confederate cause, but we refused. When women came to ask us to help, we said, no, we're not going to do that. And we became the targets of not only criticism, but also threats. So we decided that we would deliver Bibles to the troops. So that was one thing that we could do, deliver religious books to the camps. Southern women were supposed to be completely devoted to the cause. Now, do you think that you might be able to find Belle Boyd? I think we had her up there, didn't we? So I have her here. So should we pass this around just in case? Oh, there she is. Oh, perfect. That works. All right. So this is Belle Boyd. She was a Confederate, and she was so devoted to the Confederacy that she became a spy. She was one of the most notorious spies. During the Civil War, her father was a soldier with the Stonewall Brigade, and 3 of her family members were arrested as spies. So she came by it honestly. When Federal troops occupied her town, she shot and killed a drunken Union soldier who, as she wrote in her post-war memoirs, addressed my mother and myself in language as offensive as it is possible to conceive. So that's very interesting because she began her career as the rebel spy at age 17. And she didn't even get in trouble for shooting that Union soldier. She frequented the Union camps, gathering information and also acting as a courier. Learning that Union Major General Nathaniel Banks's forces had been ordered to march, she rode 15 miles to warn Confederate Major General Stonewall Jackson. Have you heard of Stonewall Jackson? He was nearby in the Shenandoah Valley. And several weeks later, when she realized that Jackson was about to attack Front Royal, she ran onto the battlefield to provide the general with last-minute information about the Union troop dispositions. Jackson captured the town, and he acknowledged her contribution and her bravery in a personal note. Boyd's flirtations with Union soldiers, that was her strong suit. She was arrested 6 or 7 times, but managed to avoid incarceration until July of 1862, when she was finally imprisoned in Washington, D.C. She was released after a month as part of a prisoner exchange, but was arrested again the following July, 1863. Now, you might remember that that's the same month as what important battle?
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg, very good. She was not exactly a model prisoner, this woman. She would wave Confederate flags, she would shout and whistle Dixie from her window, and she had a very interesting method of exchanging information with those on the outside who wanted to help her. She would sew information into a rubber ball and throw it out the window, and then when they wanted to get her information back, they would use a bow and arrow to shoot the ball back into the... Very interesting, I have to say. That was a very unique method of communicating. So in December of 1863, she was released, and she was banished to the South. She finally escaped to Canada and eventually made her way to England, where she married a Union soldier. I don't understand. She remained in England for 2 years, writing her memoirs, which she called Belle Boyd in Camp and Prison. And she achieved success on the stage. She returned to America, a widow and a mother. And in 1866, she continued her stage career, and she began to lecture on her wartime experiences. She billed her show as The Perils of a Spy, and she billed herself as the Cleopatra of the Secession. After her first husband died, she married a British officer who had served with the Union. And after having 4 children with him, she divorced him. Oh, yes. And she divorced him to marry a young actor. And then she died of a heart attack the same year as I know, in 1900. Now, another Confederate spy, if you can find, can you find this one? I think I remember seeing this one. So let's see if we find that one. Otherwise, I'll send this one around. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So this is another Confederate spy who has a very similar story. This is Rose O'Neal Greenough. She's with her daughter there. She was a leader in Washington society, but a passionate secessionist and one of the most renowned spies of the Civil War. Supposedly, she sent a message to General Beauregard, which ultimately helped him to win the Battle of Bull Run. And Jefferson Davis himself credited her with the winning of Manassas from a 10-word message that she had sent to, I think, I forget who she sent it to. She was arrested, and she also was banished to the South, where she was warmly received by Jefferson Davis, who sent her on a mission, a propaganda mission, to England and France. She wrote her memoirs while she was there. They enjoyed a brisk sale. She was even received at the court of Queen Victoria. I think have you met Queen Victoria?
Yes.
Oh, you have, okay. So especially amongst the ruling classes, I have to say, we can thank Prince Albert, because he told, one of the last things that he said to Queen Victoria was, don't get involved in the American conflict. Because if they had, it is very possible that England would have come in on the side of the South because of the ruling classes and the trade and all of that would have been impacted. So she was making her way back to America. She was on a British gunboat, And as they were coming to the coast of America, they realized they were being followed by a Union gunboat. So the British put her over the side. It was a blockade runner. They put her over the side into a little rowboat. And her little rowboat was capsized before she could make it to land. And she was dragged to the bottom because she'd sewn all the gold that she'd earned from the sale of her memoirs into the hem of her skirts, and they dragged her to the bottom. Isn't that ironic? They did recover her body, so they were able to bury her, but and there you see her picture with her daughter.
There gold.
There goes the gold, I don't know. So now this is a famous Union spy, and we'll see if we have that one up here. This is Pauline Cushman. She was an actress. Let's see, we have it. There we go. Oh, you're getting good at this. She was recruited to go undercover, and she would dress either as a woman or a man, depending on the situation. She notably prevented a boarding house mistress from poisoning Union soldiers. She found out that this boarding house mistress was planning on poisoning any Union soldiers that stayed with her. And she got, Pauline Cushman got that woman arrested. And then she went to Tennessee to steal fortification plans. And she was captured. She was going to be hanged, but she contracted typhoid fever. And here's the interesting thing. Her execution was postponed so that she could recuperate from the typhoid. And by the time she was well, Union forces had liberated her. So she received the title, you can see her as she's dressed, she received the title of Major of Cavalry for her espionage work, and eventually she did a one-woman show for P.T. Barnum. Yes, she was a one-woman show. Now, it was after that first Battle of Bull Run that I mentioned that I began hearing horror stories of the conditions of the federal prisoners that they were forced to endure at these factory warehouses that were converted to prisons, and also Libby Prison, if you've heard of that. I approached prison officials, such as Prison Commandant Lieutenant Todd. Have you heard of Lieutenant Todd? That was Mary Todd Lincoln's half-brother. Yes, and I requested a position within the factory prison. I was denied, so I went over his head, increasing my charm as need be until my request was granted. And from that point on, I visited the prison regularly. With my mother, I brought medicines, clothing, bedding, and anything Mother and I could think of that would alleviate the prisoners' suffering. And even though our visits to the prison did not go over particularly well with Richmond society, I didn't give a whit, and neither did Lieutenant Todd, because I brought him gingerbread and buttermilk every time I went. So each visit guaranteed valuable information on Confederate strategy and strength. It's interesting to note that there was a high-ranking official at Libby Prison. That's the one I didn't get to visit. And his name was Ross. He was considered by the prisoners to be the most violent person in that prison. He would suddenly launch into an attack, unprovoked, of prisoners and the colored folk that worked inside the prison to their great distress. He would take the prisoner away, and everyone believed that he was beating or killing these prisoners. Actually, what he was doing was he was taking them somewhere where he would give them a Confederate uniform, and he would spirit them out of the prison, and he would make contact with my people, and they would bring those prisoners to my house, to the safe house, until I could get them into the network and get them out. It is unfortunate that many Union prisoners never knew who this Ross really was, but it would have been dangerous for him to be known. He could have been exposed. Now, Libby Prison was not the only terrible prison. There was also Castle Thunder, where many women were held. And let's see if we can get this one. Can we get this one? This is Dr. Mary Walker, notable for being a female surgeon on the federal side. Now, I would like... yes, that is it. But I am going to pass this around because I don't think this one is on the bottom. So you see the bottom there? So we'll pass that around because I'd like you to see. It was strange enough to have a female surgeon on the federal side, but she also wore pantaloons. These are pantaloons. And eventually, as you can see in the bottom pictures, she abandoned herself entirely to dressing as a man. And I have always admired the women as well as the men who were out on the battlefield. We don't have precise numbers for obvious reasons, but there were between 500 to 1,000 women who disguised themselves as men to fight during the Civil War. And one woman, for example, at Gettysburg, she was shot in the leg and captured. She was sent to a military hospital in Chester, Pennsylvania. Oh, that's good. There we go. Perfect. There was a soldier named Thomas Reed who was in the hospital at the same time as this young woman. And he wrote to his parents, and I have a letter from him, August of 1863. He said, "I must tell you that we have a female Secesh here, a secessionist, a Confederate. She was wounded at Gettysburg, but our doctors soon found her out. They say she is very good looking, but the poor girl has lost a leg. It is a great pity that she did not stay at home with her mother, but she gets good care and kind treatment." 2 other female Confederate soldiers did not make it off the battlefield. They were both killed, and they were wounded during Pickett's charge, if you've heard of that. Now, to her surprise, Clara Barton, do we have Clara Barton up there? Clara Barton, who was the eventual founder of the American Red Cross, once treated a woman who had been wounded in battle, and Clara didn't know she was a woman, but no, that's not her. But when she found out, no.
They were going in order.
Yes, I don't know what, oh, no. Well, let's see, I probably have, there we go. I've got Clara Barton here. So she was treating a wounded soldier that she thought was a man, but discovered that it was a woman, and she had followed her fiancé into battle, and so Clara Barton helped her to find her fiancé and reunite them, which I think is very nice. So, in any case, some women fought out of patriotism, others fought out of a sense of adventure, and one was Lorinda Anna Blair. And then she eventually became Lorinda Blair Etheridge. So do we have her, Lorinda Anna Blair? She was only 5'3", but they say she was decidedly good looking. I don't know. I don't really find her particularly attractive, but her dress on entering the battle was a riding dress with 2 small pistols at her side. She was wounded slightly in her left hand, and they said her dress and her bonnet had many bullet holes. I mention her because she received the Kearney Cross for bravery during Gettysburg. Did you know that there was a woman who was awarded a medal for bravery during the Battle of Gettysburg? I know. Now, the Battle of Gettysburg took place, as we said, in July of 1863, and in November of that year, and I know I saw it, President Lincoln made a visit and made the Gettysburg Address, which I would like to share with you because it just really... Now, how many of you memorized the Gettysburg Address at one point in your lives? So you can say the first part with me. 4 score and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here. Oh, if only he knew. But it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I think we should give Abraham Lincoln a round of applause. Now, just 1 month later, in December of 1863, I was contacted by agents for General Butler, who was loathed by the South because he claimed that runaway slaves were contraband of war and who could fight for him, and he saw no reason not to arrest Rosa Neal Greenhow, even though she was a woman, and his attitudes flew in the face of everything that Southerners believed. So it was through Butler that I would funnel most of the information that I would get, and he provided me with invisible ink so that we could pass messages. We used a cipher that he gave me, and I began using household staff to deliver these to Union agents who were initially Pinkerton detectives, but eventually replaced by the Bureau of Military Intelligence. The Bureau of Military Intelligence, the BMI, was the first formal and organized American intelligence agency. Our messages were carefully hidden, and I don't know if you can find this, in a hollowed out sole of a brogan shoe. This is a brogan shoe. This is a typical shoe of enslaved people or lower class people, or in a basket of, oh, there we go. They're not very attractive, I know. But in the sole here, we could hide messages. And you might have a basket of eggs that would have an egg that had been hollowed out to put a message in. I used a custard dish at one point that had a secret compartment until the prison officials realized that so much information was getting out, they didn't let me bring food into the Union soldiers anymore. Now, with all of this information getting out, we became objects of suspicion, and our house was searched. However, I took all of my papers and I buried everything in the garden, and I took great care to keep my journal hidden, buried out back. Once, some Confederate soldiers were coming to Church Hill, and my people let me know that they were coming to confiscate our horse. Now, you know that during times of war, property, horses, food, all of this could be confiscated by the Army. So I didn't want my horse confiscated because I needed him for our espionage work. So I led that horse into the house. Oh, it gets better. Because I knew they'd come into the house. I took that horse and led him upstairs to the second floor and hid him in the study. Now, I think that horse knew because he never made a sound. He stood stock still. He never made one sound. And those soldiers, they did come, and they did come into the house, but it never occurred to them to go up to the second floor. So we saved the horse that way. Now, by 1864, I was communicating directly with General Butler at Fortress Monroe, and in February, I passed vital information on to Butler concerning a Confederate plan to move thousands of prisoners. And eventually, we were able to help many prisoners escape from Libby Prison before they were taken to the horrible Andersonville Prison. Have you heard of Andersonville Prison? Oh, my goodness. Over 13,000 Union soldiers died in the horrific conditions that existed there. Now, going back to Clara Barton, she was a prominent relief worker and nurse during the war. She was called the Angel of the Battlefield. And she, as the war was winding down, because she'd been a teacher in Massachusetts, in New Jersey, in fact, do you know Bordentown? The first free school in New Jersey was opened by Clara Barton. She knew so many young men that she began collecting information about all these young men. And she, with the acceptance of Abraham Lincoln, they opened the Office of Correspondence. And she published her intentions in a newspaper. And there was a young man who came to see her by the name of Dorrance Atwater. And he'd been a prisoner at Andersonville Prison. Because he had lovely penmanship, he had been selected by the commander of the prison to keep what they call the death rolls. So every time a soldier died, Dorrance would copy down the name of this man. And he believed that the Confederacy would not turn over these death rolls at the end of the war. And he was right. So he made a second copy, which he smuggled out of the prison. And when he read about what Clara Barton was doing, he came to her and gave her the names 13,000 families were finally able to learn. Do you know that during the Civil War, over 50% of Union soldiers were unaccounted for, and their families did not know where they had fallen? So that's a very sad thing. So they established the first national cemetery down there, and Clara Barton was the one to raise the American flag. So that was a very good thing. Now, even though we all know that these soldiers did not die in vain, and that the abolition of slavery and the preservation of the Union are noble causes for which to die, we can only abhor the violence that always attends war, no matter how noble the cause. And the suffragist, if we have that, Julia Ward Howe. Do you know her name? Well, she rewrote a popular song that, have you heard of the abolitionist John Brown? Yes. So he tried to lead a slave uprising. He was a white man. He tried to lead a slave uprising in 1859. He failed, but he'd asked Harriet Tubman, he'd asked Frederick Douglass to participate. They did not, but that was a good thing because they were unsuccessful. And his Harper's Ferry rebellion is sometimes considered to be the dress rehearsal, so to speak, for the war, which began officially on April 12th, 1861. So, in any case, Mrs. Howe's Battle Hymn of the Republic, as it was called, became very popular. It swept the North, and it became an inspiration to Union soldiers. And I think I brought, yes. Would you be able to hand these out? Okay. So I thought we could do, there's a couple over here this way. Get your very own. There we go. So I thought we could just do the first verse and the chorus, but we'll give it a moment till everybody gets their copy. Oh yes, I'm expecting you to sing. I am. You didn't come here to just sit like bumps on a log. You're going to sing. Everybody in the middle have theirs? No, not yet? I don't know if I have any more. How we doing? Everybody have a copy? That's your little souvenir. Okay. Are we ready? 1, 2, 3. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. Give yourselves a round of applause. That was excellent. That was excellent. Oh my goodness. Now, she had penned these words after a Confederate attack on Union troops and was published in February of 1862, and she was paid $5 for her efforts. Now, Gettysburg, getting back to Clara Barton, Gettysburg was a turning point of the war for those of us who wish to preserve the Union. And one of my favorite stories about Gettysburg, if we can find this, is about these two people. Lydia Hamilton Smith, who was the longtime housekeeper and probably common law wife of Thaddeus Stevens. She was considered a quadroon because she was 1/4 black. And the two of them worked for abolition and for the Underground Railroad. And during and after the Battle of Gettysburg, she hired a horse and wagon, and she would go around all the local farms, and she would tell the farmers and all the people about the suffering of the soldiers, and she would collect supplies. And when the funds ran dry, she used her own money to buy supplies. This is basically what Clara Barton did, but Clara Barton was not at the Battle of Gettysburg, but Lydia Hamilton Smith was. So Clara Barton was on the fields of many other battles. So there she goes again. Talk about Clara Barton a lot. She was on the fields of Fredericksburg, Antietam, and so many others. She participated openly as a woman, and she was very successful in her personal efforts to care for the wounded as soon as possible. Tending to the wounded on the field of battle is not easy for women, especially dressed as we were. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about clothes, because with the invention, and I think it's up there, actually, should look like that. But I have these I can show you. So in the 1850s, the spring steel crinoline was invented. And before the invention of the spring steel crinoline, women had to wear 7 to 10 petticoats in order to get the bell shape of the skirts. But with the invention of the spring steel crinoline, we no longer had to do that. So, oh, there we go. All right. But you can imagine that women would not wear a spring steel crinoline onto the battlefields. So we would wear something else. And this is called a corded petticoat. So this is starched. There are cords running through here. So I'm going to pass this around so you can feel how heavy it is. But the weight of the cords keeps it down. And because they're starched and circle, it keeps your skirts away from your legs. So we'll pass that around so you can feel. And that's heavy, right? I'm wearing a hoop. I'm wearing that. But if you're working, you would wear a corded petticoat, absolutely. So we'll start that going around. All right, so I do have, these are some styles. So maybe go down the rows and just pass one out. So you'll see different styles. And later on, if you want to look at some other styles, you can. It is necessary for women to dress appropriately for every occasion. So you'll see that there are different styles. Obviously, you're going to wear something if you're working in the fields. You're going to wear something if you're going out. You're going to wear something else if you're traveling. You're going to wear something else if you're going to a ball. And we are heavily influenced by the morals of the time, and I believe you call our era the Victorian Age, which was named for Queen Victoria. She was born in 1819, and her reign dominated the 19th century. She and her consort, Prince Albert, had 9 children in a very happy marriage until he died in 1861. And as I mentioned, we can be thankful to him, because if he had not told his wife to stay out of the American conflict, it could have been very bad. She has benefited from his interests, and one of those interests is photography. So I would like, have you ever seen, I don't know if this is in here, I'll just hold it up. Have you ever seen a camera like this? This was a relatively new invention during the Civil War, and photography was very much appreciated in those days because it would give you a lasting souvenir of your loved one. And I'm going to pass this around. So it was sometimes difficult for people to get a photographer to come to the house or to go to visit a photographer. And sometimes children would pass away before parents had a chance. So there was a kind of photography where this is real. So you can see that the children are posed either in their father's arms or in a casket, and the photographer comes to take a picture so that the parents have a way to remember their loved ones. And of course, this was very much appreciated by mothers who were sending their sons and wives who were sending their husbands off to war. So I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about the process, and then I have some examples to show you. So if you're interested, I have 3 of these, so if we could make our way, if these could make their way back to me, I would appreciate it. So we call this type of photography daguerreotype or tintype, and the photographer would take a plate, like a glass plate. All right, you see the plate? So he would coat the plate with a solution. He'd put the plate inside a wooden frame, and the wooden frame would then, is the camera going around? Or do I have that? No, I have that. Okay. So the wooden frame would be placed inside here. You see the hinges there? And he uses this black cloth, and then he opens this up, and he exposes the plate to the light. So the person who is posing has to sit perfectly still, because if you move, you become like a ghost image. And then he puts the plate in a solution of cyanide, which eats away what's not needed and produces an image. And then he can make photographs from the plate. So I'm going to send this around. There's a glass plate. Just try not to put your fingers on it. Just touch the edges. And then here we have, this is called the tin type. So you can see this is a tin, and it would be the same process. And then you have an image, and then you can make photographs from the image. So pass that around. All right. And then here's another glass one. Here's a glass one. Now, so you can see the difference between our photography and yours, I offer you a comparison of a ball gown done with Victorian photography compared to what the dress looks like with modern photography.
Oh, that's an extra one.
So quite different. Huh? So I know in our photography everything looks sad, but it's just the photography. All right. So the final, can we get this one? Do we have this one? Oh, it's up there. Oh, there we go. So this is Mary Surratt, and if we could pull this down. The reason I wanted to show you this is because this was the first photograph of a woman, here she is, being hanged. She was hanged for being a conspirator in the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. She was the first female to be executed by the federal government, and it is so tragic that Lincoln was killed only 5 days after Lee's surrender. 5 days. He'd gone through that whole war. Have you ever seen pictures of Lincoln before the war compared to pictures after the war? The stress was just terrible. So that was on April 9th that he was killed. But just before that, on April 3rd, Confederate lines broke and Union troops entered Richmond. Now, because of my help and my mother's help to the Union was well known, there was a mob that formed just outside our mansion. And they threatened to burn my house down. And I said to them, I pointed a finger and I said, I know you, I know you, and I know you. And if you touch any part of my house, you know who's coming to town, Ulysses S. Grant, and you will suffer his wrath. So the crowd dissipated. And Grant did come to my home and had tea with my mother and I at Church Hill. After the war, when he was made president, he rewarded my efforts by naming me Postmaster of Richmond. That was a post that I held from 1869 to 1877, and I earned $4,000 a year. That was a very good salary, I can tell you. I then went to Washington, where I held a modest clerk position. I returned to Richmond years later, and I wrote in my journal, "No one will walk with us on the street. No one will go with us anywhere." And it grows worse and worse as the years roll on. My mother died in 1875, and our reputation as traitors was such that I was not able to gather enough friends to act as pallbearers. And it was my people, my former slaves, that helped us. I could not abandon my home. I know you probably think it's rather strange that my mother and I would stay there, but my house had been the principal place of refuge for so many that I just could not abandon it. In 1900, I died at home in poverty as we had, little by little, sold everything else, and we had to pay the taxes on Church Hill. I am buried in Richmond's Shockoe Hill Cemetery, so if anyone wants to come down and visit me, I would be more than pleased. And you will notice my beautiful headstone. And I have the inscription here for you. It says, "She risked everything that is dear to man friends, fortune, comfort, health, life itself, all for the one absorbing desire of her heart, that slavery might be abolished and the Union preserved. The tombstone was a gift from the Boston relatives of Colonel Paul Revere, who was the grandson of Revolutionary War hero Paul Revere. And my colonel, I had housed him, I had saved him during the war. And unfortunately, he ended up dying from wounds that he got at Gettysburg. But his family was very pleased with my efforts anyway. And J.P. Reynolds, who was his nephew, eventually became the executor of my estate and took care of all my papers. And he would bring down gifts and everything from Boston. So that was very nice. Anyway, I was very pleased to come here today to talk to you a little bit about some of the women who were involved in the Civil War. And are you surprised at some of these activities? Did you know about some of these women? All of them? Some? So I think it's very important that we recognize the contributions of all people in any walk of history. And so I am very pleased that you were able to make it out here tonight, and I thank you so much for your kind attention. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. Yes, ma'am.
Did any of the women collect a pension from either side? The Confederate?
Yes. Pensions have been collected by women since the Revolutionary War. There were even some Revolutionary War women who served disguised as men and then ended up collecting pensions. So yes, there are women who have collected pensions as Civil War soldiers as well. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. So if you have anything, you can just bring it back up once you pass things around. If you could bring those things up, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you.